During lunch, my daughter-in-law said, "Let's stick her in some random corner. No one will notice." I went to do the dishes. The next day, when I terminated the lease on the house, she came running in a panic because they had just spent their entire savings on an unnecessary renovation. I still remember the exact moment when those words cut through me. It was Thanksgiving, a day meant for gratitude and family. The dining room was filled with the rich aroma of roasted turkey and sweet potato casserole, my specialty. I had spent 3 days preparing everything, making sure William's favorite cranberry sauce had the perfect balance of tart and sweet, just as he liked it since he was a boy. Martha had barely acknowledged my cooking, merely nodding, when I placed the steaming dishes on the table. My son William, once my greatest defender, now seemed perpetually distracted whenever I was around, his eyes rarely meeting mine during conversation. I was reaching for the gravy boat when I heard her whisper to him, thinking I couldn't hear. Her voice was low but clear enough. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Let's stick her in some random corner. No one will notice. The gravy boat trembled slightly in my hand. I set it down carefully, making sure not to spill a drop. No one seemed to notice the slight quiver in my fingers or how the color had drained from my face. "I'll just clear these dishes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. William barely looked up. "Thanks, Mom." In the kitchen, I ran the water hotter than necessary, letting the steam rise around me as I scrubbed each plate with methodical precision. 40 years ago, I had held this same boy when he had nightmares. I had worked double shifts at the hospital to put him through college. I had co-signed for the very house they now lived in, a house I was still making payments on, and now I was someone to be tucked away in a corner. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of tea, growing cold between my hands, and thought about how I had become invisible in my own family. It wasn't a sudden change, more like erosion, slow and persistent until one day, you look up and realize the shoreline has completely changed. It started when Martha first came into William's life 6 years ago. She was charming then, calling me Mom within weeks, asking for my recipes, telling me I would be the daughter I never had. I was flattered, desperate for female companionship after years of being just William's mom since my divorce. The changes were subtle at first. Martha would reschedule our Sunday lunches. Then she began answering when I called William. Soon, I was seeing my son only at holidays and formal occasions. Then came my grandson, Timothy. I wasn't called when he was born. I found out through a Facebook post. When I finally saw him, Martha controlled every interaction, hovering nearby, quick to take him away at the first whimper. "He needs his routine," she would say, as if I hadn't raised a child of my own. My visits became shorter, the intervals between them longer. I was allowed to babysit only when they were desperate, and even then, Martha would leave pages of instructions, as if I were a teenager rather than a former pediatric nurse with 30 years of experience. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered last month. My friend Barbara showed me Martha's social media posts, ones I couldn't see because she had restricted my access. There she was, complaining about the insufferable mother-in-law and how they needed to find a way to get rid of her for good. Worse were the comments where she suggested I was developing dementia, that I couldn't be trusted with Timothy, that I was becoming a burden. William had replied with a laughing emoji, a lifetime of love and sacrifice reduced to an inconvenience. The next morning after Thanksgiving, I made a call to my bank, then to my lawyer. By afternoon, I had initiated the process to terminate the lease agreement on their house, the house that was still in my name, the house where the mortgage payments came from my account each month. I didn't do it out of spite or revenge. I did it because I finally understood that I had spent my entire life giving pieces of myself away until there was almost nothing left. It was time to reclaim what remained. 2 days later, Martha showed up at my door, her face flushed with panic and indignation. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pushing past me into the entryway. I closed the door quietly behind her. "Hello, Martha. The bank called us about the mortgage. They said you're terminating the arrangement? That can't be right." I gestured toward the living room. "Would you like to sit down?" She remained standing, arms crossed. "We just put our entire savings into renovating the kitchen. We can't afford to lose the house now." The kitchen renovation I had advised against, the one Martha had insisted on, despite the perfectly functional kitchen I had helped them update just 5 years earlier. "I'm sorry about your timing," I said. And I meant it. I never wanted to cause harm, only to protect myself. "You can't do this to us. to your own son and grandson. The arrangement was always temporary, Martha. You and William knew that. But why now? What brought this on? Her eyes narrowed. Is this because we couldn't make it to your birthday last month? Because Timothy was sick? Timothy hadn't been sick. I had seen the vacation photos they posted online that weekend, Martha, William, and Timothy at a beach resort, while I sat alone at a restaurant table with a single candle and a slice of cake. It's not about any one thing, I said. I'm making some changes in my life. Martha's face shifted, the panic giving way to calculation. She took a step toward me, her voice softening. Mom, if you're feeling lonely or left out, we can fix that. You know how much we value you, how much Timothy adores his grandma. I had seen Timothy 3 times in the past 6 months, each visit cut short by Martha's sudden remembering of an appointment. This isn't a negotiation, Martha. I've made my decision. Her mask slipped then, her features hardening. You're making a huge mistake. William will never forgive you for this. You'll lose your son and your grandson. The threat hung in the air. Between us, heavy and pointed. 6 months ago, it would have worked. I would have backtracked, apologized, done anything to maintain even the illusion of family. But not anymore. I've already lost them, I said quietly, but I'm not going to lose myself too. Martha left my house that day with her threats hanging in the air. I watched from my window as she slammed her car door and sped away, tires screeching against the pavement. She would tell William her version of our conversation, painting me as the unreasonable, spiteful old woman she believed me to be. That night, as expected, my phone rang repeatedly. William's name flashed on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to answer, not yet. I needed time to gather my strength to prepare for the accusations that would inevitably come. I sat in my small living room, the only light coming from a reading lamp in the corner. The house felt especially quiet that evening. Looking around, I realized how much of my life had been defined by what I'd given away, rather than what I'd kept for myself. On the mantel stood a photograph from William's college graduation. I was beaming with pride, my arm around his shoulders. He had just received his business degree, a degree I had paid for by working 60-hour weeks as a pediatric nurse, often coming home with my feet so swollen I could barely remove my shoes. Remembered those years clearly. After Robert left us when William was just 7, I had no choice but to become both mother and father. The divorce left me with nothing but a child to raise and a mountain of debt Robert had secretly accumulated. The courts ordered him to pay child support, but the checks came sporadically at first, then stopped entirely when he moved out of state. I never complained to William about our struggles. I took extra night shifts so I could attend his daytime school events. I learned to repair our ancient car myself, watching instructional videos at the library. I sewed patches onto his clothes when they wore through, and when that wasn't enough, I took on mending jobs from neighbors to pay for new ones. When William needed braces, I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I had inherited. When he wanted to attend soccer camp, I canceled our cable subscription and picked up weekend shifts. When college acceptance letters arrived, I remortgaged our small house to ensure he could attend his first-choice school without student loans, weighing him down. I did it all willingly, joyfully even. William was my world, and his happiness was worth every sacrifice. After college, William landed a good job at a marketing firm. I was so proud, watching him build his career, finally able to stand on his own. When he met Martha at a company event, I was genuinely happy for him. She was beautiful, confident, and seemed to adore him. Mom, she's incredible, he had gushed over dinner shortly after they started dating. She gets me in a way no one else ever has. I remember smiling, ignoring the small pang in my chest. Wasn't that my job once? To understand him better than anyone? When they decided to get married after just 6 months of dating, I didn't voice my concerns. Instead, I emptied my modest retirement account to help pay for their wedding. Martha had expensive taste, and William wanted to give her everything she wanted. It's just money, Mom, he said when I hesitantly mentioned the cost. Don't you want me to be happy? Of course I did. So I signed the checks and smiled through the elaborate wedding planning, even when Martha rejected my offers to help. Even when she excluded my few close friends from the guest list to make room for her extensive social circle. The wedding was beautiful, if impersonal. I sat in the front row, watching my son beam at his bride, feeling both joy and a strange sense of loss. Something was shifting, though I couldn't quite name it then. Afterwards, when they struggled to find affordable housing in the city, I offered to help. That's when I made what I now recognize as my greatest mistake. I purchased a house in a nice neighborhood, putting it in my name but letting them live there while making only nominal payments to me. It was meant to be temporary until they saved enough for a down payment of their own. "You're the best, Mom," William had said, hugging me tightly as I handed him the keys. "We'll take good care of it, I promise." Martha had smiled too, though. It didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is so generous. We won't forget this." But they did forget. The nominal payments became irregular, then stopped entirely about 2 years ago. When I gently inquired, Martha explained they were a little tight this month, due to their vacation in Cancun. The next month, it was a new car. Then renovations. There was always something. Meanwhile, I continued making the mortgage payments, dipping further into what remained of my savings. I told myself it was an investment in our family's future. I told myself William would remember, eventually, all I had done for him. But watching Martha's face as she threatened me today, using my love for William and Timothy as a weapon against me, I finally understood the painful truth. My generosity hadn't been an investment in our family. It had been taken for granted, expected, then exploited. My phone buzzed again with William's call. This time, I answered, "Mom, what the hell?" His voice was sharp, angry in a way I'd rarely heard directed at me. "Martha's hysterical. What did you say to her?" "No, hello? No, how are you? Just accusation." "Hello, William," I said calmly. I told Martha the truth. "The house arrangement is ending. You can't just do that," he was practically shouting now. "We live there. Timothy lives there. What are we supposed to do?" I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "The same thing other adults do. William, find a place you can afford. We can't afford anything else in this neighborhood. Timothy's school is here. Our friends are here." "I understand that," I said. "But I've been carrying the mortgage for years now, and I can't do it anymore." There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something softer, cajoling. The tone he used when he wanted something. "Mom, if this is about the payments, we can start making them again. I know we've been slack, but things have been tight." "It's not just about the payments, William." "Then what?" His frustration was mounting again. "Is this because we missed your birthday? Martha told me you seemed upset about that." I almost laughed. "Timothy wasn't sick that weekend, William. I saw your beach photos on Facebook." Silence. Then defensively. "We needed that getaway. My job has been stressful, and Martha—" "William," I interrupted gently, "when was the last time you asked me about my life, my health, my happiness?" More silence. "I don't want to fight," I continued, "but I need to make some changes. I've spent my whole life putting your needs first. Now I need to think about myself." William's silence on the phone spoke volumes. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he had no ready answer, no clever deflection. "I have to go," he finally said, his voice tight. "We'll talk about this later." The line went dead before I could respond. I set my phone down on the coffee table and leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation I had been dreading for years had finally begun, and there would be no going back. The next morning, I awoke to a text from Martha. "William and I have decided to give you some space. Obviously, you're going through something. When you're ready to discuss this rationally, let us know." I almost smiled at the condescension, as if I were a petulant child having a tantrum, not a woman finally standing up for herself after years of quiet submission. I didn't reply. Instead, I made myself a proper breakfast, something I rarely bothered with when eating alone, and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad. It was time to take stock of my life, to make real plans instead of simply reacting to William and Martha's needs. My financial situation was concerning but not dire. I had been retired from nursing for 3 years, living on my pension and social security. It was enough for my modest needs, but the mortgage payments on William's house had been draining my savings at an alarming rate. Without that burden, I could actually start rebuilding my nest egg. As I was making notes, my phone rang. It was Barbara, my oldest friend and the only person who had consistently seen through Martha's facade. "Janet, how are you holding up?" Her voice was warm with concern. "You heard already?" Barbara snorted. "Martha's been posting vague statuses about toxic family members and protecting her child from negative influences. Didn't name you specifically, but it's not hard to connect the dots." My stomach tightened. "She's turning this around on me." "Of course she is," Barbara said matter-of-factly. That's what manipulators do when they're exposed. Want me to come over? I make a mean martini, and it sounds like you could use one. I hesitated, then realized there was no reason to say no. I didn't have to keep myself available in case William called. I didn't have to sit by the phone hoping for an invitation to see Timothy. I'd love that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Barbara arrived an hour later with a small overnight bag and grocery sack. I brought supplies, she announced, marching into my kitchen and unpacking fresh vegetables, pasta, and a bottle of good gin. You need food, alcohol, and a sympathetic ear. Not necessarily in that order. As she cooked, I told her everything. The name tag incident, the confrontation with Martha, William's angry call. Barbara listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of outrage. You know, she said as she stirred the sauce, I always wondered when you'd finally reach your breaking point with those two. What do you mean? Barbara gave me a look. Janet, I've watched that woman systematically isolate you from William for years. Remember your 70th birthday? She organized that surprise party, invited all their friends, and then seated you at a table with people you barely knew while she kept William by her side all night. I did remember. I had been so grateful for the party that I'd overlooked how lonely I'd felt throughout it. Or what about last Christmas? Barbara continued. When she accidentally scheduled their family photos during the exact time you were supposed to come over for dinner, you ended up eating holiday ham by yourself. She said the photographer had a cancellation. My voice trailed off as I recognized the pattern. There had always been excuses, always reasons that seemed plausible in isolation, but formed a disturbing pattern when viewed together. The worst part, Barbara said, lowering her voice despite us being alone, is that I don't think William even realizes what she's doing. She's got him completely under her thumb. I thought of my son, my bright, kind-hearted boy who once brought me wildflowers just because they matched my eyes. How had he become so blind to my pain? So dismissive of my needs? I showed you those social media posts because I couldn't stand watching it anymore, Barbara admitted. Maybe I should have shown you sooner. I shook my head. I probably wouldn't have believed it. I needed to see it for myself. After dinner, Barbara poured us each a martini, and we moved to the living room. The alcohol warmed my chest as Barbara pulled out her tablet. There's something else you should see, she said hesitantly. I wasn't sure if I should show you, but after today. She opened a private Facebook group and turned the screen toward me. The group was called Monster-in-Law Support and had thousands of members. I felt a chill as I recognized Martha's profile picture among the most recent posters. Her post was dated just 3 weeks ago. Need advice on setting boundaries with ML, who's showing early signs of confusion but refuses to see a doctor. She's becoming a safety concern around our son, but husband feels guilty about limiting contact. How did you handle this with your own parents? The comments below were filled with advice on how to document incidents, how to convince my son I was becoming incompetent, how to limit my access to my grandson without seeming cruel. One comment from Martha stood out. We're thinking of suggesting she move to a senior community for her own safety. It would be much easier to control visits that way. My hands trembled as I handed the tablet back to Barbara. They want to put me away. They want your house, Barbara corrected grimly. I'd bet my life savings that's what this is really about. They've been living in your property for years, probably assuming you'd eventually sign it over to them or leave it to William in your will. A cold clarity washed over me. The renovation they had just completed, the one that had supposedly drained, their savings had been extensive. New kitchen, expanded master bedroom, landscaped backyard. Who pours that kind of money into a house they don't own? People who believe they will own it soon. People who see the current owner as a problem to be solved. There's more, Barbara said, reluctantly. Martha has been posting about memory care options and asking for recommendations. She's been laying groundwork, Janet, making it look like you're declining, so when they eventually push you into some facility, their friends will see it as them being loving, responsible children rather than what it really is. Which is what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Barbara's eyes met mine, unwavering. Elder abuse, financial exploitation. Maybe not in legal terms yet, but that's where this road leads. I took a long sip of my martini, letting the harsh truth settle over me. All this time, I'd thought Martha merely disliked me, that she was simply possessive of William. I never imagined she was actively plotting to take what was mine, my home, my dignity, my freedom. What are you going to do? Barbara asked. I set my glass down with a firm click against the coffee table. Exactly what I've started. Take back my life piece by piece. William will fight you, she warned. Probably, I agreed, but I raised him. I know all his moves before he makes them. Barbara smiled, a fierce pride in her eyes. That's the Janet I've missed. Welcome back, old friend. That night, after Barbara had gone to sleep in my guest room, I sat alone in the darkness of my living room. My phone remained silent. No more calls from William, no texts from Martha. They were regrouping, planning their next move. For the first time in years, I felt truly awake. The hurt was still there, a deep ache that I suspected would never fully heal. But alongside it was something new: determination. They had underestimated me, dismissed me as a feeble old woman past her prime. Their mistake. I hadn't survived raising a child alone, working night shifts in a pediatric ICU, and rebuilding my life after Robert's abandonment by being weak. I had been bending for years to keep the peace, to maintain whatever scraps of relationship Martha allowed me with my son and grandson. But I wouldn't bend anymore. And I certainly wouldn't break. They wanted to relegate me to some forgotten corner of their lives? Fine. But they would learn that corners can hold surprises. And this particular corner still had plenty of fight left. 3 days passed with no word from William or Martha. The silence was calculated, I knew, designed to make me anxious, to push me toward reaching out first. It was a tactic Martha had employed before whenever I'd expressed even the mildest disagreement with her decisions regarding Timothy. I refused to break. Instead, I used the time productively. Barbara stayed for 2 days, helping me sort through old files and paperwork. Together, we created a comprehensive record of every penny I'd contributed to William and Martha's lives, from the house payments to the loans that were never repaid, from Timothy's preschool tuition to the family vacations I'd partially funded. You're not planning to sue them, are you? Barbara asked as we organized the documents. No, I said, but I need to see it all in black and white, for myself. The total was staggering, nearly $340,000 over 6 years, not including the initial down payment on the house. Looking at the figure, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: anger at myself for being so blind, grief for what that money could have meant for my own security, and a strange sense of liberation now that I finally recognized the pattern. On the 4th day, William finally appeared at my doorstep. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his normally immaculate button-down wrinkled at. The cuffs. Can I come in? He asked, his voice subdued. I stepped aside silently, allowing him into the small foyer. He looked around as if seeing my home for the first time, though he'd visited dozens of times before. Coffee? I offered, more out of habit than hospitality. He nodded, following me into the kitchen where he took a seat at the table. The same table where I'd helped him with his homework for years, where we'd celebrated his acceptance to college, where we'd sat together after his father's funeral 5 years ago and reminisced about the few good memories among the many bad ones. I set a mug in front of him and took the seat opposite, waiting. Martha's been staying with her sister, he said finally. She took Timothy with her. I nodded, unsurprised. Another tactic, removing my grandson, knowing it would hurt me. She's pretty upset, Mom. I imagine she is. William frowned, clearly, expecting a different response, perhaps an immediate capitulation, an apology, a retraction of my decision about the house. Look, he said, leaning forward, I know things haven't been great between you and Martha. She can be difficult sometimes, but she's my wife and Timothy's mother, and I need to support her. I understand that. Do you? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. Because it feels like you're deliberately trying to punish us. We put everything into that house. All our savings, all our plans for the future. And now you're just pulling the rug out from under us. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth steady me. William, do you remember what we agreed when I bought that house? He shifted uncomfortably. That we'd make payments to you until we could get our own mortgage. And when was the last time you made a payment? He looked away. Things have been tight. 18 months, I said quietly. The last payment you made was in May of last year. Since then, I've covered every mortgage payment plus the property taxes that increased after your renovation. We would have caught up, he protested. We just needed time. Time for what, William? Your vacation to Bermuda last summer? Martha's new SUV? The landscaping project that cost more than I make in 6 months from my pension? His face flushed. That's not fair. We work hard. So do I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. I worked hard for 40 years. I worked nights and weekends to put you through college. I emptied my retirement account to help pay for your wedding. I've sacrificed everything for you, William. Everything. He had the grace to look ashamed, at least momentarily. I know that, Mom. And I appreciate it, I do. But this feels sudden, extreme. I reached for the folder Barbara had helped me prepare. I want to show you something. Sliding it across the table, I watched as he reluctantly opened it. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. The detailed accounting of every dollar I'd given them, every loan never repaid, every promise broken. This is what I've contributed to your lives, I said. And in return, I've been pushed further and further to the sidelines. I've watched as Martha restricted my time with Timothy. I've listened as she told friends and family that I'm becoming senile. His head snapped up. She never said that. Without a word, I took out my phone and pulled up the screenshots Barbara had taken of Martha's social media posts. I passed it to him, watching as the color drained from his face. She was just venting, he said weakly. Everyone complains about their in-laws sometimes. This isn't venting, William. She's been systematically building a case that I'm mentally incompetent. Why do you think that is? He stared at me, speechless. She wants the house, I said softly. She wants me out of the picture. And she's been manipulating you to make it happen. That's ridiculous, he protested, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Martha loves you. She's always saying we should include you more. When have you ever actually included me, William? When was the last time you invited me over without me asking first? When was the last time you brought Timothy to visit me without me practically begging? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, seemingly searching his memory for examples that weren't there. I heard her at Thanksgiving, I continued. Let's stick her in some random corner. No one will notice. Those were her exact words, William. About me. Your mother. His shoulders slumped. She didn't mean it like that. How else could she have meant it? He had no answer. I reached across the table and gently took back my phone. I'm not doing this to hurt you or even to hurt Martha. I'm doing it because I've finally realized that if I don't stand up for myself, no one else will. Certainly not you. The words hit him like a physical blow. I could see the impact in the way he flinched, in the sudden brightness in his eyes. Mom, I want you to leave now, I said, rising from my chair. You have 3 months before the lease termination is final. That should be enough time to find a new place. Please, he said, his voice breaking. Don't do this. We can work something out. I'll talk to Martha. I'll make her understand. This isn't about Martha anymore, I said. It's about me, about what I need. He stood up, his coffee untouched. What about Timothy? Don't you care that this will affect him? It was a low blow, using my grandson against me. A year ago, even a month ago, it might have worked. But not now. I love Timothy more than you can imagine, I said, and I hope I'll still be part of his life, but that's up to you and Martha now. So that's it? After everything, you're just cutting us off? I shook my head. No, William, I'm just finally cutting myself free. I walked him to the door, my heart heavy, but my resolve unshaken. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned back, his expression lost, almost childlike. I don't understand why you're doing this, he said. I know, I replied. That's the problem. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps fade down the walkway, the car door open and close, the engine start. Only when the sound had completely disappeared did I allow myself to slide down to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees as the tears finally came. This wasn't the end I had wanted. Never in all my years of loving him, of sacrificing for him, had I imagined our relationship would come to this. But sometimes endings were necessary for new beginnings. I sat there until my tears subsided, until my breathing steadied, until the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my living room floor. Then I stood up, wiped my face, and walked to my small home office. It was time to make some calls. Time to rebuild a life that had been on hold for far too long. The next morning, I woke before dawn, a habit formed during decades of early hospital shifts. The house was quiet, the world outside still dark. For the first time in years, I didn't immediately check my phone for messages from William or photos of Timothy. Instead, I made a cup of tea and watched the sunrise from my back porch, allowing myself to simply exist in the moment. My confrontation with William had left me drained but oddly peaceful. The truth was finally out in the open, no longer festering, beneath polite smiles and hollow pleasantries. Whatever happened next, at least I wouldn't be living a lie. Later that morning, I called Dr. Michaels, my longtime physician. "Janet, good to hear from you," she said warmly. "Everything all right?" "I'd like to schedule a complete cognitive assessment," I said, "the most thorough one you offer." There was a brief pause. "Any particular reason? Have you been experiencing symptoms that concern you?" "No symptoms," I assured her. "But my daughter-in-law has been suggesting I'm developing dementia. I want official documentation that I'm fully competent." Dr. Michaels' voice sharpened. "I see. Well, I'd be happy to arrange that for you. And for what it's worth, I've been your doctor for 15 years, and I've seen no signs of cognitive decline whatsoever." The assessment was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I had another important appointment to keep. The hospital where I'd spent my nursing career looked much the same as when I'd retired 3 years ago. The same antiseptic smell, the same soft hum of medical equipment, the same controlled chaos of the nurses' station. Several familiar faces lit up as I walked through the pediatric ward. "Janet!" Melissa, the charge nurse who had once been my mentee, rushed over to hug me. "What brings you back to the trenches?" "Actually, I have a meeting with Gregory," I said, referring to the hospital's HR director. "Is he still in the same office?" Melissa nodded, her expression curious. "He is." "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said with a smile. "I'm exploring some possibilities." Gregory welcomed me with the same enthusiasm he'd shown when I'd retired. After catching up briefly, I explained my situation. "I'm not looking to return full-time," I clarified. "But I miss nursing. I miss feeling useful. Is there anything part-time?" "That might work for someone with my experience." Gregory leaned back in his chair, considering. "We've actually been discussing implementing a mentorship program for new pediatric nurses. The turnover rate in that department has been higher than we'd like, and the newer nurses could benefit from someone with your expertise." He smiled. "Would 3 days a week be of interest?" As I left the hospital with a tentative offer in hand, I felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. The prospect of returning to nursing, even part-time, filled me with purpose. I had defined myself as William's mother for so long that I'd almost forgotten who I was outside of that role. My next stop was Charlotte Edwards' law office. She'd been a patient's mother years ago, a young, overwhelmed single mom whose daughter I'd helped through severe pneumonia. Now she was a successful attorney specializing in elder law. "Janet!" she exclaimed, embracing me. "It's been too long." I explained my situation, the house, William and Martha's behavior, my concerns about potential further manipulation. "First, you absolutely did the right thing terminating that lease arrangement," she said firmly. "Based on what you've described, this was heading toward financial exploitation, possibly worse." She helped me understand my options, how to protect my assets, how to ensure my wishes would be respected regardless of what William or Martha might attempt. "I'd recommend a new will," she advised, "and a durable power of attorney given to someone you trust completely, someone other than William." That evening, Barbara called to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than expected," I admitted. "I've been busy." I told her about my meeting at the hospital and with Charlotte. "You're going back to nursing?" Barbara sounded delighted. "Janet, that's wonderful." "Part-time," I clarified. "But yes, I think it will be good for me." "And have you heard anything from William or Martha?" "Not directly," I said. "But Martha's sister Lydia called me this afternoon." Barbara groaned. "Let me guess, she tried to make you feel guilty." "Actually, no." I still felt surprised by the conversation. She apologized. Apologized? For what? For not speaking up sooner. Apparently, Martha has been less than truthful with her family about our relationship. Lydia said she's been uncomfortable with some of Martha's comments about me for a while, but didn't feel it was her place to interfere. "What changed?" I sighed. "Martha's been staying with her, complaining constantly about me being vindictive and unstable. But then Lydia overheard Martha on the phone with a realtor, discussing how they could get the house appraised once the old lady signs it over." Barbara made a disgusted sound. "Charming!" Lydia confronted her, and Martha admitted they've been planning to get me to transfer ownership for months. She justified it by saying I was becoming too forgetful to manage the property. That's elder abuse, Barbara said flatly. That's what Lydia said too. She was horrified. She told Martha she needed to leave, that she wouldn't be part of something. So wrong. So where are they now? I don't know. Lydia said Martha packed up and left with Timothy. She hasn't heard from her since. The next day, as I was weeding my garden, William's car pulled into my driveway. He looked even more disheveled than during our last encounter. Mom, he said, approaching slowly. Can we talk? I gestured toward the porch. We can sit outside. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the creaking of the swing chain and distant lawn mowers. Martha left, he finally said, staring at his hands. She took Timothy to her parents in Ohio. I nodded, unsurprised but still saddened by the pain in his voice. I found some emails, he continued. On her laptop, she's been talking to a lawyer about how to get the house put in our names, claiming you're not competent. My heart constricted. So it was true, and now William knew it too. There's more, he said, his voice barely audible. She's been recording our conversations with you, editing them, making it sound like you're confused. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. She was building a case, Mom, against you. I reached out and placed my hand over his. Despite everything, he was still my son, and his pain was still my pain. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have seen it. I should have stopped it. Why didn't you? I asked gently. He shook his head. Because it was easier not to. Because Martha always had an explanation for everything. Because... He hesitated. Because part of me liked the idea of having that house, of not having to worry about money the way you always did. His honesty, though painful, was the first real connection we'd shared in years. What happens now? I asked. Martha's threatening divorce if I don't fix this situation with the house. She says she won't bring Timothy back until it's resolved. Using him as leverage, I said quietly. Yeah. He rubbed his face wearily. I've been so blind, Mom. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. This is for you. Inside was a check, not for the full amount he owed me, but substantial nonetheless. It's a start, he said. I sold my car, the fancy one Martha insisted we needed. I looked at the check, then back at my son. It wasn't just about the money. It was about recognition of his mistakes, of my worth, of the boundaries that had been trampled for too long. Thank you, I said simply. As he stood to leave, he turned to me with a question in his eyes. Do you think we can ever fix this? Us? I considered my answer carefully. I don't know if fix is the right word, William. Some things, once broken, don't go back together the same way, but maybe we can build something new, something better. He nodded, understanding the gentle boundary I was establishing. I'd like that. After he left, I returned to my garden, kneeling in the warm soil as I carefully tended to the new plants I'd put in just days before. They were still fragile, still establishing their roots. With proper care, they would flourish. Without it, they would wither. Relationships, I reflected, weren't so different. 6 months can change everything. The pediatric ward buzzed with activity as I finished my shift. Returning to nursing part-time had been the best decision I could have made. After years of being gradually diminished in my own family, being respected for my experience was healing. As I gathered my things, my phone chimed with a text from William. Still on for dinner tonight? Should I pick up anything on the way? Him. Relationship was different now, more cautious, more honest, but healthier. The collapse of his marriage to Martha had forced a reckoning that cleared away years of resentments and unspoken expectations. Martha had filed for divorce 3 months ago when William refused to contest the house lease termination. The proceedings had been ugly, with Martha making wild accusations about both of us. But her credibility crumbled when William's lawyer presented the evidence of her manipulations, the edited recordings, the emails plotting to have me declared incompetent. The custody battle for Timothy had been painful. Martha initially tried to deny William any visitation, claiming he was influenced by his mentally deteriorating mother. But my cognitive assessment, showing I was not only competent but scoring above average, undermined that narrative. So had the statements from Martha's own sister. The court awarded William primary custody, with Martha granted supervised visitation. Last month, she suddenly moved to California with a new boyfriend, leaving only a brief note saying she needed a fresh start and would be in touch about Timothy later. My grandson had been confused and heartbroken. At 5 years old, he couldn't understand why his mother left without saying goodbye. William had brought him to me, desperate for help. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he had admitted. I had sat beside Timothy, offering the steady presence frightened children often need. Eventually, he climbed into my lap, his small body shaking with sobs. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I told him softly. "Sometimes they get confused about what's most important, but your daddy loves you, I love you, and we're not going anywhere." Slowly, Timothy began to heal. Having a consistent routine helped. Weekdays with William and after-school hours with me, weekends filled with simple activities. William found a small but cheerful house to rent just a few blocks from mine. The house that had been the center of so much conflict was sold 2 months ago. I used the proceeds to pay off my own mortgage, make needed repairs, and establish a college fund for Timothy. The rest went into a retirement account, ensuring I would never again be financially vulnerable. William had been surprised when I gave him a portion of the money. "Mom, you don't have to do this," he'd protested. "Not after everything." "It's not about what I have to do," I told him. "It's about what I choose to do. You're rebuilding your life, and you're doing it the right way this time." I pulled into my driveway just as William's car arrived. Timothy raced toward me, a paper clutched in his hand. "Grandma, look what I made at school," he exclaimed, showing me a colorful drawing. "It's you and me and Daddy at the park." William approached more slowly, carrying groceries. "I thought we could make that pasta dish you taught me." In the kitchen, we worked side by side, Timothy chattering about kindergarten from his perch at the counter. "I was thinking about taking that teaching position at the community college," William said. I looked up in surprise. "The evening business. Classes? I thought you were worried about the schedule with Timothy." He nodded. "Barbara mentioned she'd be happy to watch him those nights, and I think it would be good for me to do something different, something that helps people." Barbara had become a regular fixture in our lives, her warmth making her a perfect unofficial grandmother for Timothy. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Timothy played with Legos while William and I talked about everyday things. His work, my patients, an upcoming school event. Nothing extraordinary, just the gentle rhythm of family conversation. Later, after they left, I sat on my porch swing. My neighbor Ellen, a retired teacher I'd met in my book club, joined me. "How was family dinner night?" she asked. "Good," I said. "Really good," Ellen smiled. "When you first told me your story, I wondered if you'd ever be able to forgive your son. I watched fireflies twinkling in the darkness." "Forgiveness is complicated," I said finally. "It's not about erasing what happened. It's about choosing not to let it determine the future." After Ellen left, I thought about the corner Martha had wanted to stick me in, invisible, forgotten, diminished. Instead, I had found my way to a different corner entirely. One with space to breathe, to grow, to live authentically. I had lost some things, illusions about my son, dreams of what our family might have been, the house I purchased, thinking it would keep us close. But what I gained was far more valuable. Self-respect, genuine connection, and the quiet joy of being seen for who I truly was. No one would ever put me in a corner again. And if they tried, well, I knew now that corners could be excellent vantage points from which to reclaim one's life.